and most welcome to 942 of the Heidegger series. And I will continue a little bit, 943, sorry. And I will continue a bit with Susie Frobel and her endeavor into the fractal time. And as I previously mentioned, fractal time is getting into the juicy parts of reality. It's understanding for you to get into time you must train and develop yourself, and first of all you need to have this glorious revelation it is of something entirely new. I can compare it to something that was sent to me by Henrik, my dear friend in Stockholm, a little YouTube clip, and I all of a sudden realized after all years that Rotterdam port got a lot of its shipping from the Danube River, and oddly enough I never thought about that. I've been in Rotterdam a couple of times even, and I know it to be the biggest port in the world, but I never figured why. And it's not that I had some pre-idea of what it was. Instead, it was just a blank. And I think that is very interesting in itself. It was just a sheer blank. After I realized that a lot of the trade come from the Danube, and especially from the Black Sea from the beginning, I suddenly realized, oh my God, here we go. And then the question came after the realization. And it was a little bit funny, but I can say once you realize that the difference between subject and object can be moved, so you don't have to have this fixed in between that is always situated in the very same place, and it's not movable because you're not even aware of it. Once you realize it can be moved, then the question emerges of why should I move it, or rather how, or in what intention should the movement go. And all of a sudden there is a great revelation, and in contradistinction to this revelation of mine about the Rotterdam harbor, this will affect every other knowledge, and of course it will thereby be harder to gain as knowledge, but it still will be incredibly valuable. Well, even more valuable, because this will enter every aspect of your knowing, because every time you know something you take this pre-installed division between subject and object that cannot be changed. Your focal setting remains something to be discovered. That means that in every millisecond, in every microsecond, your life will be changed. So maybe in this case it's not so much only the revelation in itself, but rather the usefulness you can have in every different circumstance. I would say this would make it possible for it to spread and have its influence in areas that you formerly thought were impossible for influence. And I said that this exploration by Susie Frobel, and I will continue in her book Fractal Time, and I will look into this thing called extended boundaries. But I would say this is an exposition that goes much deeper than I firstly thought. This exposition goes into time, but it also goes into space. She mentioned fractality of space many times. And of course, since fractality is the mode that we are accessing with her explorations and investigation. Of course, fractality also will come into the domain of knowing, the knowing factor. The knowing factor becomes something that you can develop, and it is something your knowing capacity can join into. And this sounds really weird when I'm saying this, but it means that you've been used to passive knowledge, so you don't know that you have a gear shift somewhere in your mental / external sphere. And what you will discover is this gear shift. And this is the focal setting, but I prefer the idea of a gear shift. That you're sitting in a car, you sat there for 40-50 years, and you haven't realized you can actually shift gears. And shifting gears means that you can adapt the gear. If you're coming in a hill, you can put in number 1 or number 2. If you're going down a slope, you can put in 4 or 5. You want to take over someone on the highway, you can put in number 3 or 4 or something similar. This gear shift, first, I think it could be better to think that it has positions. Otherwise, going from this stable position, unknown stable position, I have to repeat, you're not aware that the focal setting is changeable. Your whole inner world and your whole outer world is sort of built upon the realization or the position, the ontology, that it could not be moved in any way, that it could not be changed, and you don't have this flexibility. So it could be better to start with the idea that there are 3 or 4 positions or 5 positions. Why don't make it a gearbox in the beginning? I think that would help with the understanding. Make it a little bit, make the overturn a little bit softer, making it not so different from only 1 position and going to 5. I think that is more reasonable. Otherwise, having no determination whatsoever, it sounds like an automatic car, or even an automatic car do have its gears. It's just the clutch that is not needed in this case. And this is of course something that is very pertinent to the new view on time. The new view on time really gets into the juicy parts of reality. It shows that we have an interactive possibility that we weren't before aware of. And the fractality of time also means participating. That your intellectual / temporal / special powers all of a sudden become movable, mendable, flexible, constantly accessible, not out of bounds, not beyond what you can reach, not beyond your sphere of influence. And it goes very, very close to what Susie Frobel explained about the walking stick. It becomes an extension into the world. So it's not only that you yourself become extended, you extend into the world and you start interacting with the world. She showed that people who are having hemisphere neglect don't care maybe about their left side of your body and the left side of your visual sphere. So they only eat, and I've seen this myself, for people who are suffering from stroke, they only eat half the plate, the rest is neglected. By using this walking stick, you can teach these people slowly, to learn to understand the other part of reality. This is similar because here you start to understand what time and space and knowledge are, and the moldability that can be different is a very integral part of what it is. Without understanding that, they won't be that easy to understand. They will not open up themselves to understanding. So it's a flexibility thing here. You really go into something that from the beginning was unknown, very close to my example of Rotterdam. I didn't know it was a question there why Rotterdam is so big. I just saw it to be big. I had other explanations that were after the question, and one of those things I already answered many years ago. Why is Holland so extremely rich? Of course, it has to do with its great seaport. Rotterdam is one of the reasons, because not only they get the money from all taxes, customs, import and export, selling and buying, it is an incredible extra stimulation for their commerce. Of course, their banks, the banking systems in Holland is much advanced. Their ways of making business, the merchants, and also industry. We have Philips, we have DAF. What else do we have? We have production of tulips. We have an incredible production of tomatoes, one of the biggest in the world, and all so forth. They all, depending on export, maybe not only by sea ship but also by truck. But their trucking and exportation system when it comes to trucks is also very extensive, no doubt. Oh, it's okay. So my questions came after the fact, and I think this is quite similar to the onti question and the ontological question. It is not until you start to understand that something truly can come before that you also understand that there is a question there. So the result comes before the question. So first you get information somehow, or there is an opening up of the situation, and then you get this question. So the why question is not where you start actually. You start with the revelation that there is a what question. I think that's the first take on the whole thing. And then you can start to get curious why you never asked this what question in another way. You start changing the what question, and all of a sudden you realize there is something before, and then is where the why question kicks in, not until then. So that is very similar with the Rotterdam example I just mentioned here. It is just after the fact I understood the importance, the why comes. So the usual idea that it starts with a question could in itself be a limitation. Not knowing can in some ways actually be a source of knowing. That also gives me the opportunity to think a little bit more about constructions. Constructions in the sense of deconstruction is not what we think about constructions. we think of constructions that are within our thinking system, or a model within our thinking system. These constructions are not like that. They sort of regulate knowledge from within themselves, not from the outside. Therefore, in some sense, they cannot be visible from the outside. They can never be visible from the outside. And that's not a defect. In contrast, it is actually a very good tip on how to access them. They do not access themselves directly from the outside. What they do instead, they become accessible from the inside. And I would say that is actually a helping thing. That could help you to understand what they are. These constructions construct themselves from the inside, and they do look to some extent actually a little bit like they develop knowing like, or they develop their knowledge from within, so it's an investigative area that you can dwell deeper and deeper into. It's like experience or realizes some sort of territory. The further you go into this territory, the more you understand of it, and it opens itself to understanding whereas you go into it. And this is this rather wondrous thing that is fractality. Fractality is the very thing of understanding that complexities can actually come from the inside. This fractality is the complexion unit that we always work with, and understanding that there is a complexity hiding behind what looks like nothing. Actually looks like nothing. Before we start our investigation, we cannot access anything. There's nothing there to access because we sort of don't look where we should look. I don't know if that makes it any clearer. There is no looking around, there is no areas, there is no views of anything. And enter into the knowing procedure is the first take on reality. I think this is comparable to the discovery by Hernan Cortés of Mexico, or why not Cristobal Colon. When Christopher Columbus discovered America, he had no idea he went to America. And that took, I think, 10 years after the very discovery. And that's why he called it the West Indies. He thought he came to India. This was the western part of India. And then came the discovery that by going around the globe, he actually came to something completely new. And that the globe itself was much larger than he thought from the beginning. This sort of shows that there is a question where you didn't know it was a question. And once you realize the world is different, the question comes. And here we come into the hermeneutic circle, which I think now finally have come to my understanding. It is one of the most difficult things to understand. And the reason is not it's hard to pronounce, it's hard to read. The reason is that projection is something we just can't handle. we just don't realize how important projection is. So let me continue on page 67 of the book, Fractal Time. Systemic codes display extended, yet from an endo-perspective, indivisible temporal perspectives. The internal fractal structure in the shape of nested details becomes invisible to the endo-observer when those nested interfaces have merged into one boundary. We may say that for an endo-observer, his world observer boundary expands and is shifted outwards when it incorporates a model of the observer himself and his environment. An ex-observer also uses models, but he does not incorporate them. They are part of his environment and thus beyond his world observer boundary. In the terminology of anticipatory systems theory, an endo-observer who has incorporated a model of himself and his environment displays what the scientist and researcher Dubois denotes as strong anticipation or endo-anticipation. On page 18, Dubois defines an anticipatory system as a system that computes its current states in taking into account not only its past and present states, but also its potential future states. And here we come into passivity. It is here called weak anticipation or exo-anticipation. By contrast, merely requires an observer to use a model of the external system for which he intends to make a prediction. This is very interesting. This is how we usually plan when we are in the classical physical model. And that is taking all things that happened before, scenarios, comparing them to each other's and weighing them against each other's. Here we don't have any creativity, we do not have any advanced circle of hermeneutical understanding, and neither do we have a huge anticipation. Reality cannot spring into action if we don't have this high anticipation of reality, that we really try to make a reality before it's springing into action. Only then can reality spring into existence. This is the active presence. We have to realize that we have 2.5 millennia of passivity. It is so ingrained in our thinking system, it is so ingrained in what we are, it's so ingrained in our educational system, it's so ingrained in what we think of others, what we think of ourselves. Everything is passivity. And I would say even when it comes to human beings are the only one that prefer to sit down or lay down, because there is no prana or energy to the system. Here we finally realize, without having a very, very complex, fractal, intricate model of reality, we cannot reach reality as such. There is a complete impossibility in that. We need to project actively, and that can only be done once we start to understand that we as bystander will produce a world that is oversimplified, doesn't take our energy and doesn't give us the energy that we are investing in the whole thing. It is very similar to every other thing you do in life. You only get back as much as you invest. And here, much more so and in any other case. And I said it before and I repeat it once more. In order to even perceive, we send out 3 times as many neurons and neural activity from the visual organ to the hearing organ to the smelling organ than we get back. It's an active process. And you see here how we really go against the grain of the idea of a passive reality. And that the very idea of passivity is so ingrained that we at the outcome only accept what we receive back from passivity. So our reality, the analytical philosophical reality, the reality of classical physics, the everyday reality that we encounter among other people, that we talk about, that we discuss, that reality has this faded, low energy, lack of color attitude to it. It doesn't have zest, it doesn't have intention, it doesn't have this vivid, colorful, explorative fascination of reality. It is a rather shaded, slow, inactive reality, sitting in the theater. And of course, if you learn your whole life to sitting in the theater is all what you get, you adjust to that and you think you are doing luxurious things when you slouch, when you fall together, when you lie in the sofa completely collapsed. Within that limited knowledge, you think that's a good thing, that it's a luxury of some sort. So until the moment you realize you decide your whole reality, and by that it becomes more objective. That is the only chance of making it objective, is getting into it, being active. Then you will see that that previously perceived luxury, this relaxation or cutting out of reality, is not luxury anymore in comparison. It used to be luxury in that level of being. That is understandable. And it's also luxury in that level of being because you don't have that extended time, so you can remember it wasn't so pleasurable. Because pleasure come into the picture. You don't look for pleasure anymore. That's part and parcel of the problem. And when you're not looking for pleasure, you also get less energy from reality. This lessening of energy is the passivity of the reality. Regaining energy means that you get stronger, you will more actively anticipate what's going to happen, you will thereby also influence what you get into reward. The rewarding system will in itself fuel the next anticipation you get, and it will progress and it will progress further and further and further. And as it gets stronger and stronger, your perception power will also be stronger and stronger. So it's like taking hold of reality once more. It is coming into a more vivid reality. It fuels itself. The energy you put into the reality, you will get that tenfold back again. And for every time you put in a little bit, you get more in reward. So you have a constantly rewarding system. And the more rewards you accept, the more you get back. So you get a different kind of loop. The first loop, the more limited loop, the lower level of energy and everything, there you get very little. And therefore you also get very little in return. And you get used to that, and the more you get used to that, the more you try to get the little gains you have within that system, and you make do with those little gains the more you make do with those little gains, the less you get in return. So it's a different take of the hermeneutical circle, but this take of the hermeneutical circle shows that you can spin out of the present model and go to a higher level of energy, where everything you put in, you get back. And this more active perception will at the very beginning be something that takes a lot of energy. But as you get accustomed to this way of being, you will notice that every time you do it, you get more back, and all of a sudden you are the leader of your own world, and it becomes less subjective. People start to understand you, your language becomes more understandable, you will be able to interact more actively with other persons. So the whole fueling system comes into action, and this is very similar to discovering something new. And it's first when you discover these new energies that you also will become be able to ask a question. Why didn't I think about this before? The why question comes afterwards in some ways. It is strictly post-actuality. And once you acquire that actuality, you can go further. Oh my God. I think that's about time to end.